Hello, hi, good afternoon. My name is Beatrice Galilee. I'm the director of The World Around, and I am very happy to be talking to Kunlé Adeyemi, my friend, and also the amazing founder of NLE Architects. You're based in Lagos at the moment, I understand. How's it going there?
It's going okay under the circumstances. Lagos is not as terribly affected as many other countries, but relatively speaking, it is also impacting people's lives. The city's on lockdown, and the whole country is on lockdown. So we're here having a quiet time.
And how is the government handling the crisis over there? I understand they're doing quite a bit more than probably they are in the US in terms of temperature testing and taking care of people.
Well, I think the government has, and not just the government, the individuals and the private sector, and stores, supermarkets have always taken a bit of early caution and measure in trying to identify people who may have high temperatures. So there's always been checks at these stores and supermarkets. I would say for about a couple of months for sure.
Okay.
And I think relatively speaking, the city was put on lockdown earlier than many cities in the world. So, and this may also just be out of an outcome of the Ebola crisis, where we've learned a lot in managing a pandemic and epidemics like this. And but it's still relatively early to make any kind of judgments, but where the government is making some efforts. It has some there are some gaps, particularly with the poorer people in the city that need a lot more support on a day-to-day basis. But on the health sector, I think they are taking some measures, and there's some preparation for cases. But it is also arguably that the testing is not sufficient, that we could do a lot more tests. We are not seeing as many symptomatic people either. So we're hoping that for some reason that the country, the city will be a lot less affected by this pandemic.
And we're here on Earth Day, and I think it seems extremely difficult to disconnect this crisis, the COVID crisis, from the climate crisis. Do you think that as an architect, as a member of the human race, do you feel that this is a wake-up call, this is an opportunity to evaluate our relationship with the environment?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, I think for sure the crisis has shown us the very, very simple implications of reducing our consumption, our wasteful production, wasteful movements, and just several things that we do as a human race that I think could be a lot less detrimental to the environment. And we've heard stories from all over the world of how the environment and the earth is recovering, or it's just just getting back into the beautiful situation that we would love it to be. So in a way, yes, I think there's a very clear relationship between our impacts on the planet and the climate, and it's very obvious that we could make adjustments going forward.
Mm-hmm. And from a personal standpoint, do you feel that you have a studio in Amsterdam, you have a studio in Lagos, you travel around the world? Do you feel, as I, also as a curator, also traveling nonstop, it makes me look back at my air miles and feel kind of, you know, a little sick sometimes, you know? How does it make you feel?
No, for sure. I think we've all done, you know, a fair share, and if not an unreasonable share of travel. And this might be the first time in 15 years or thereabout that I've been in one location for this long. So it's actually quite a welcome relief somehow, particularly because I think it's a time to rest, it's a time to recover, it's a time to reflect. It's a time to exercise, it's a time to cook, to do all the nice things that we've always imagined doing that are essential, right? That are just basic and really just valuable in day-to-day life. Being at home, being with family, being connected with people, and somehow the fact that the entire world is almost doing this at the same time, we're all in this together, is also a bit of a relief that we're not, there's a slight break in this human rat race.
Definitely, no, 100%. I mean, from the professional standpoint, you've said before that architecture is the interface, essentially between humans and their environment. So what does this mean for us as a profession? What can we contribute? And obviously your work and practice has already addressed climate change in your work in Lagos, but maybe on a bigger scale, what does this mean for architects? How do we think about public space? How do we think about building in a way that has less impact? What does it mean for places of gathering? Do we have to retrofit spaces now that we have this sort of new airborne virus, threat? How do you go about thinking about something like that from a professional standpoint?
Yeah, well, I mean, I personally have been very cautious to make these forecasts and judgments. I'm not an expert at making these forecasts, but I do know, I'm much better at looking at a current situation and responding to it, and also thinking about what might be a future scenario when the facts are on ground. And I think it's a little too early to make these predictions. I mean, of course, we can speculate and look at scenarios. Indeed, I think, for me, architecture plays a very important role in how our world will continue to evolve. This is, in my view, the virus is some sort of an evolutionary self-regulating mechanism where somehow the planet, the earth, our humanity, the consequence of that relationship is producing something that is regulating our activities. And in a way, what I find a little bit interesting about this situation is that it really sends us back to our fundamental basis, which is the home, and the home, in my view, is the fundamental building block of any society, and that's why we called our practice Kunlé, which means at home. So it really shows in this crisis that at the end of the day, we have to rethink how we establish our relationship from our homes and on a very personal level, and we have to take responsibility at the level of the individual, and that would then have an effect on the collective. So we have to rethink our homes, right? We have to rethink what we can do, what is most essential, what we can realize in the home. And if we can make a home work, then we can make the city work. And we can make the city work, we can make the planet work. We can. So in that sense, indeed, I think architecture plays a very important role because it is really that interface between humanity and the environment. And what we stand for is building diversity and coexistence between humanity and the environment. And so I think this gives us the opportunity to really rethink the planet, but really from the home, from the individual. Of course, there will be very obvious short, medium to long-term implications of what, let's say, the home is, or the office is, or our public spaces are. I mean, one can make very immediate judgments about the fact that, yes, in the short term, we may not be gathering in large spaces. We may have to think about our homes and, you know, to make it more conducive for working and living. You know, there may be a shift into bigger homes for many people, just because you want a little more space. There may be a shift in the interest of outdoor living. So there may be a shift into interest in making the home a lot more circular. You know, you have everything you need. You want some green, you want some plants, you know. And I think that's just, it's everything we've been talking about. It's everything. It's about sustainability. It's about urban farming. It's about green. It's about, you know, healthy living, wellness. And finally, it takes a crisis for that to happen. So I see that both as, I mean, the crisis is a terrible and unfortunate situation, especially for people who have lost their loved ones, and, you know, the challenges that we're dealing with in hospitals, and every day, you know, someone is affected. But I think it really is also an opportunity for us to reflect and start to make adjustments towards a much better future and a much healthier earth, and relationship with the world.
And do you think, I mean, that the relationship with the world now is going to be also mediated through this sort of lack of, you know, in a way, personal accountability, that your health is now something that is, your personal accountability affects your community. You know, maybe that's also something that people will start to become more, right? The human relationships and physical relationships, right?
Yeah, no, I think so. I think so. I think, again, it really is just a trigger for us to realize that our responsibility to ourselves is also responsibility to others, right? And you know, just the very basic things of, you know, wearing a mask and keeping what you have to yourself, and washing your hands and staying at home. I think these are just very basic principles. I mean, in a way, I feel coronavirus it's also sort of a mechanism that to domesticate or re-domesticate humanity, and we somewhat needed that to sort of realize that you know, the basis, the fundamental for ensuring a sustainable human development relies on very simple, basic principles.
And talking of, you know, living with nature, maybe you could talk, what is that image in the background? I mean, you do obviously working with living on water and living with water. What's going on behind you there?
Well, that's a rendering of a water city, which we presented in 2014 at MoMA for an exhibition called Uneven Growth. So at the time, we developed the idea of a city that it was in coexistence with the environment, with nature, and a city where there's a large part of its urban fabric is with water, and one that also is inclusive, diverse. It has, you know, different forms of urbanism, from, you know, tall buildings, and like you have in Chicago, to, you know, lower buildings that you have in in Amsterdam to, Venice to Makoko in Lagos. It's this sort of hybrid of living and coexisting with the environment. So that's an image of a water city there.
And are you working on, what are you working on at the moment?
As you may know, in 2011, I launched a project called the African Water Cities Project, which looked at the intersection of the challenges of urbanization, rapid urbanization, and climate change, specifically in African cities. And so this is, I've been doing a lot of research on that. I've worked with several institutions in the States, Cornell, Columbia, Harvard, and Princeton, where we've taken students from these institutions and done studies and research in different African cities. So we've been expanding that research and finally putting together a book which is based on the research and findings for looking at the relationship between growth of cities in Africa, in main African cities, and of course the fact that although Africa is said to be the least responsible for climate change, is one of the most affected by it, with a large population within a high and extreme high risk zones. So we're basically studying these locations and looking at how people are adapting to both issues of rapid growth and urbanization, and also dealing with the challenges of water. So the book essentially looks at three things: Africa, water, and cities.
Well, when's that coming out?
Early next year. We think we would have some delays because of the crisis. So we're looking at early next year.
And do you think that those case studies will have resonance for other cities that are dealing with water? I know Amsterdam has a lot of people, living on water, and so many other coastal cities around the world.
Yes, for sure. I mean, we're also looking at a very broad, the research is quite broad, and then it focuses on Africa. So it takes case studies from all over the world, generally from Asia to North America to Europe. We have a very broad view of it, but specifically focusing on Africa, where, of course, there's not a lot of information. So it's taking some time to gather information or data, and collect images that are relevant, and also just we're also having contributors writing. So I'm going to be calling you up.
I'm available. I've got a gap in my schedule there. Okay, I think that's all that we can say today. I'm sure we'll catch up another time. Thank you so much, Kunlé, for being part of this and for part of Earth Day. And yeah, take care. Hope to see you soon.
You.
Bye.
Bye.